so linguistics often gets very iffy in this kind of thing, because a lot of these experiences, including dream experiences, are not only not ordinary, but they don't always involve language in the way that most of us know language. And so you have people like Freud and Carl Jung who were investigating the language of dream states. Um, and then we have people today who still like the idea of being able to interpret um, dreams in some kind of a way. But that's very difficult to do, because um, we're dealing with different states of consciousness that have different geographies, different languages, different cultures, all encased within ourself as a person. So um, when I make a what may sound like a weird statement, like I'm dreaming now, that may make sense to me, but it might not make sense to another person. The Aborigines in Australia, I think it is, have um, a very deep dream culture, or not of non-ordinary states of consciousness, and not induced by psychoactive substances either, but through changing and breathing and ritualistic drumming and dancing. And there's a saying in the Aborigines have, I don't know if I'm interpreting it correctly, but they say, I the dream, I walk here. And it's a state of authoritative statement about consciousness. So um, a lot of my experiences, who's to say if they were clairvoyant or clairaudient, and not everyone around me was clairvoyant or clairaudient, couldn't necessarily see or hear the things I was seeing or hearing. And they may say, well, you're dreaming. And I could have been in a daydreaming state kind of way. So you're probably getting a sense that this is just kind of going down the rabbit hole when we're trying to talk about it. So I can only speak from my own experience. And I wrote this book called Tangible Dreaming um, as it was a compilation. I belonged to an active dream community in the 80s here in New York, way before the internet. So the way that we communicated was very different. We had newsletters and stuff. And I published some of my dream experiences then that I were calling tangible dream experiences. So the book is a synthesis of those writings, and then updated to include some modern references and just some musings about it. And it ends with the question, is this physical mediumship? Is it the beginning of physical mediumship? I don't know. Tangible dreaming is, so people are using the word lucid dreaming, and I'm still not on board with calling a tangible dream a lucid dream. Um, Lucid dreaming is defined as when you wake up in the dream state and you realize you're in a dream, but your body doesn't wake up. And you're able to actually consciously move about in the dream and play um, and talk with people and travel distances. Maybe it's an out of body experience, um, but the landscape is very malleable, and gravity doesn't exist in the way that it exists here. So people have all kinds of lucid dreams, and there's all kinds of ways of inducing lucid dreams. And so I was doing that I don't know why I was doing it, but as a teenager, I started inducing, or my spirit guides actually taught me how to induce a lucid dream. First, they taught me how to do out of body experiences, and then to be able to control them. This at some point sort of it became addictive. Um, so that's where this idea of inducing states of consciousness or inducing things, I'm not comfortable with. Um, but we see a lot of it where, especially in um, modern, what we'll call new age studies, people are saying that they can induce certain states of mind that they can induce afterlife experiences for grief resolution and so on. Um, Inducing anything uh, can be very, very tricky. And so in my book, I talk about the experiences and the qualitative aspects of them, and also, um, as best as I can, my experience. But I refrain from offering a formula of how to induce a tangible dream experience because I don't know if it's necessarily safe for someone who is not emotionally or mentally stable. Um, which doesn't preclude anyone, whether they're the degree of their mental wellness or not, but it's sort of goes beyond my responsibility that I want to take. Um, it would be like someone wanting me to give them drugs, and I couldn't do that. And say you have to figure that out yourself. So it's kind of an ethical thing. So lucid dream is that one general definition, um, and I'm I don't know. I don't know how many people here have had a lucid dream or think that they've had a lucid dream. Um, the difference is intangible dreaming. It at least so after I wrote this book and also published in some of the newsletters and magazines back in the day, people from all over the world were writing to me and had never told anyone about their tangible dream experiences because they thought that they would be locked away or stigmatized in some kind of a way. So for me, a typical tangible dream experience would either happen generally coming out of the sleep state. So it would often be in the morning, but it could also be coming out of a nap. So it could be during the day, or it could be um, falling asleep at night, but it was more often waking up. And there are layers of consciousness, we could call them, as you're coming back into your body's awareness and the awareness of where the body is. And there's an experience that's been documented for thousands of years, where people wake up usually in the middle of the night and they're paralyzed and they can't move and they feel like there's something sitting on their chest. And so this is kind of very similar to that. What's happening is scientists believe that in order for us, when we fall asleep, the brain releases very particular chemistry that, for um, certain reasons, paralyzes the body. So your body can't get up from the bed and start running around the room, acting out whatever's going on in the mind. But I don't know how that works with people who sleepwalk. Chemistry is very odd in the human body. And so people are waking up and they're aware of the bed, and they're aware there's light coming in the room through their eyelids, and they may hear like someone moving around in the kitchen or the bathroom, but they can't move, they can't get out of bed, they can't call out. And the body goes into a kind of um, um, primitive fight or flight uh, anxiety experience. So it's very frightening for most people. And it was that way for me at first too. It happened many times. And Um, then I began to hear voices speaking to me while I was hearing sounds coming from around the room where I was sleeping. Um, and some of the voices could have been my own inner chatter that I was hearing, um, old belief systems, old belief programs, whether they were spirit people talking to me, that could be as well. And then I started feeling people touching me. So I'm awake and aware of the bed beneath me. I can hear the bed as I move. I can't open my eyes. I can't cry out. And but suddenly now there are people coming into the room and sitting on the bed, um, talking to me, talking to each other. Sometimes I'm aware that there's little animals that burst in and jump up on the bed and run out. and it's quite baffling. And um, it took quite a while to be able to calm myself down, in the same way that when someone wakes up in a lucid dream, usually they pop right out of it very quickly. They have to learn how to stay in that lucid state. And so I had to learn how to stay in this tangible state. And eventually, it didn't evolve past that state for me. Um, it seemed to go latent. And then years later, after my spouse Tim had crossed over, and then he came, reappeared back to me, um, that he physically manifested in my presence. He began physically manifesting very much as if it were a tangible dream experience, that I would be awake, um, coming out of what's called a hypnopompic state, which is the sort of paralysis. And somehow Tim was able to utilize that opportunity to come into my reality and to start manifesting tangibly with me in bed. Um, a couple times it was he was only able to manifest his hands. And so his hands would come out from under the covers and come up and then pull the covers down from me. And that was his way of teaching me how to slowly wake up by changing the temperature of my body. But there were just these hands. So I'm going to count that as a tangible experience, but not a dream experience, because I was able to open my eyes and see what was going on. In the tangible dreaming experience that I write about in the book, I was not able to open my eyes because of the chemistry of paralysis that was going on. Um, I wasn't able to cry out. Like I had a roommate at the time who lived in another, who was staying in another room, and I would get so scared that I would cry out. So that's basically as best as I can articulate what the experience is. And um, I did have letters from people from all over the world who were just relieved that they heard that someone else had had these kinds of experiences before, and no one was trying to interpret them in mediumistic ways. Um, Other than they were afraid that they had a mental illness of some kind, or this was schizophrenia, or this was delusional. Um, to the best of my knowledge, no one has ever been harmed in any kind of way. No one has ever been pushed over into a psychotic state of mind that they couldn't come back from. But it probably, if we were to, in the way that they stick a dreaming person into what's called an fMRI machine, which is an MRI machine in real time, so it's not taking pictures, but it's showing you visually what's going on. It would be really interesting to see what the chemistry is in these. So I developed a technique to induce these states, which involved a ritualistic approach of breathing and meditation, um, and mindset. So that worked for me, but I don't think I would ever share that with anyone. A lot of people would. um, and holotropic breathing, which some you might know is called rebirthing, where the Groffs believed that people were, through certain kinds of hyperventilation, um, you would experience 4 stages of birth, um, and prenatal and perinatal stages of birth. So, but they caution too in all of their work that not just anyone can do this. So that's sort of what I'm cautioning too, is like, this may sound very fascinating and an experience that people want to have, but I don't feel that I'm in a position to teach people how to have it, and I'm not even sure if it's useful in any kind of way, because I can't report that it made my life better in these experiences. It maybe made it interesting, um, but there was also a kind of isolation where there wasn't very many people to talk to about it as I am now, which might have made things very much different. So I'm going to stop for a bit, and I'm sure you're all just um, you might have some questions or something, or you want to contribute something. So I'll open up the floor for that.
Yeah, August, I have done holotropic breath work, and all I can say about it to describe it is that it's indescribable. And I don't know what happens during that episode, but it certainly is an altered state, and it took me places I never dreamed I could go. And so I know what you mean about in going into these states of mind, but it is a state of mind. Like Al Botkin, when he does induced after-death communication, doesn't really induce the after-death communication. What he does is put people into a state of mind using bilateral stimulation and EMDR. But there is something about going into that altered state that is indefinable.
You will see in the older indigenous societies, which I consider to be the wisest of societies on the planet, basically non-white Western people, are very guarded and careful about when to induce such states. And even I just got back from several intense days and many long hours of being in a darkened room in a very ancient Native American ceremony of healing, where they've developed long, complicated, complex rituals to ensure safety of everyone. And they have all kinds of safety plans in place in case something goes awry or someone doesn't feel well. I don't know how well, I know Bakken's work to a degree. I haven't experienced it, but I don't know. I'm not comfortable with it. I mean, they're using the word inducing, so I guess because my research has shown that non-indigenous people, white psychotherapists and psychoanalysts like me, really have been trained in very different ways, almost to approach it from a state of pathology to healing, rather than just from a state of healing to more healing. And that could be debated forever. The tangible dreaming experience is not induced by drugs or alcohol. As far as I know, and this is all based on anecdote that people reported to me, was they didn't have any particular health issues that we might suspect would cause certain non-ordinary states like brain tumors or compromised body chemistry or irregular heart rhythms. So for me, it was just fascinating that I had these experiences during mid to late adolescence and puberty. So a lot of the people too were ashamed to share about their tangible dreaming experiences, where people would come into the room and sit on the bed and sometimes push on their chest or hold their hand or poke them in the nose. I had an experience where several people would come into the room, circle the bed, and they would hold this long spear and stick it into my navel and twist it. It was incredibly painful. And later on, I was able to find some ancient Sanskrit text where it's a poem, but it's talking about that very experience. And I don't know if someone would call that a Kundalini experience, but eventually it stopped. And other people also shared the same thing, that they thought that they didn't know whether these people coming in sticking this spear into their navel were friend or foe. My experience was they were kind of neutral, that it wasn't malevolent in any kind of a way. It was like they were inducing something in me. And so I just want to make it clear that it's not about spirit possession or malevolent spirits, at least in my experience, because I often experienced small animals come into the room um, and run around the room and jump up on the bed and make odd noises, that there were birds that would come in sometimes and fly and land on me. But there was never any physical evidence left behind. Like there was no bruises or scratches left on me. There were no bird droppings or cat poop around the room or anything. It was very mysterious. No one would be able to tell. And so a lot of people also were worried that they had these experiences around the same age, um, late adolescence into their early 20s. And there was a sexual element to it as well, because it kind of stimulated the body, and so people felt that they were being sexually stimulated during these tangible experiences. And depending on the people reporting, they had a certain amount of shame about sex or embarrassment or humiliation, and so didn't want to talk about it. But some were able to open up to me about it as well. Um, when I was studying at the Monroe Institute Consciousness Studies um, down south years ago, um, all the facilitators of the groups there are all licensed clinical psychologists here in the United States, so they know their stuff, and um, they were very cautious to male participants to say like that you're going to get sexually stimulated through some of these things, and so taught us how to rechannel that sexual energy. Um, so I also am putting that out there because I sense that there's a lot of energy that we would call sexual energy, or Reich would have called organ energy, that arises from medium mystic events um, as well too. Um, but depending on our culture, whether we are kind of embarrassed about sex or not, that still isn't, you don't hear much conversation about that in most physical mediumship sittings anyway. People were at first trying to rationalize what was going on and to sort of come up with a story. Well, this is what's going on, to make sense out of it. It's the left brain is trying to make sense out of a right brain experience. And so initially, some people did question whether they were having an abduction experience, or whether there were not extraterrestrials trying to come in um, and abduct them. But no one ever reported that to me, and that wasn't my experience at all. I could see where your mind would go there, and as trying to find an answer to what was going on and rationalize it, but no one ever said like it. They weren't removed from their bedroom. They didn't have any memory of that. It's like they just woke up in their bed, had these people come in and talk to them. Um,
So
I'm
it
trying to
really sounds like it can be quite frightening to an adolescent, and I'm just wondering if what people would say to their child who is having these experiences and is disturbed by them.
I don't know. I mean, I haven't heard of any children having these kinds of experiences, unless I think I suggest in the book that maybe this is, sometimes when children are very afraid of that there's something under the bed, um, or that something comes out of the closet and touches them, or gets close to the bed, or they can feel like it's pushing the bed in some kind of a way, that they might be having these experiences. But the majority of parents will soothe the child by just saying you were just having a dream. And so here's where we see the idea that dreams aren't real, that there's no reality to dreams. And then, but if you've ever been around a child that has had that kind of experience, it takes an awful lot of, like, they're not convinced, they don't believe. I feel they say, no, there really is something in the closet. There really was something under the bed. And the therapeutic thing would be to honor what they're saying and to ask them questions or let them express their feelings, or to say, you know, do you want to look in the closet together, or do you want to come sleep with mom and dad, or something, sort of offering alternatives in that way. Um, when you're an adult and this stuff is happening, you really don't, at least I didn't have anyone that I could have come soothe me, or that I could talk about what was going on. I just kind of had to write it out. So yeah, Wendy, it raises a lot of interesting questions about consciousness, about dream states, what we're calling a dream state. Robert Lanza wrote a really excellent book called Biocentrism, and he's a very honored scientist, a biophysicist, I guess you could call him. And up to this point, the main paradigm by everyone has been, at least in Western worlds, is that first there was the universe, and then out of the universe arose consciousness. And he's saying it's the opposite. There's always been consciousness, and out of consciousness has arisen the universe. And so he proves it in a scientific way. He uses biology, he uses quantum physics, he uses regular physics. It's quite fascinating. So for me, this is just part of the revolution that's always going on, or the evolution that's going on, even with physical mediumship. Is something that we didn't hear much about. It was kind of isolated, and the internet, of course, has opened that up, and we're seeing all different kinds of mediumship. Scott Podmore, the Australian journalist, who's won all kinds of awards for his journalism, wrote a book on mediums, and he interviewed 13 or 14 or 15 different mediums from around the globe, including me and Tim. And the diversity of mediumship, I had never really realized until I saw this. Like, every single medium in the book is very different. And then I started studying mediumship in Indigenous societies and Native American societies, and what they call mediumship is very, very different. So does this mean that for me, tangible dreaming was like an evolutionary thing towards my own physical mediumship, and is still growing? And does our physical mediumship that we're all experiencing in some way, does that, it's going to change? Because I see a lot of people trying to do physical mediumship in formulaic ways, that they want certain things to happen. My group, I can't speak for Craig, but I assume Craig's group as well too, is the impetus is somewhat different. The agenda is somewhat different. Instead of inducing physical manifestation phenomena into the room, it's more of bringing us as a conscious person in the room forward into other dimensional aspects, which we're calling portals at this time.
But yeah, look, I've had experiences such as August is talking about of sleep paralysis. And in one case, which went on for a very long time, that just before it started, I felt a dog that I knew it was a dog that I'd been very close to, that had died years before. And she had a way of jumping on the bed and sort of folding on the spot so that my husband wouldn't kick her off the bed. And this happened, and then I entered into the same sleep paralysis state. And I thought, oh, there's the dog, but I've been dead for ages. Yeah, fascinating stuff. I do know that my youngest daughter, August, has narcolepsy, and she's adopted, so it's no blood relationship there. And she has had quite a few what's called sleep paralysis, where you're awake but you can't move. And yeah, the first few times she was very scared, but because it's happened to me, I've just said, look, it ends, you know. So we did talk about it, but she never would go into much detail, being a teenager when it started. And of course, that's when narcolepsy quite often becomes apparent, in teenage years. But for me, that didn't happen until my later years. I don't remember having any sleep paralysis as a teenager.
It's also, people can have these experiences. So I call them, I would put them under what I call numinous experiences, as opposed to phenomenal experiences. The phenomena of the world belong to here. Like, you can pick up a cup and, drop it, and there's a phenomenon. A numinous experience belongs to elsewhere. It's something that kind of pops into our reality. And there's a phenomenon that I call psychospiritual amnesia, where I believe that we all have these extraordinary, non-ordinary things happening to us throughout our day. And they are so outside of the norm that we don't retain a memory of them. And the memory is very, very brief, and it's just wiped out. It's just amnesia. I've learned, and I know this is because I've learned how to maintain a certain amount of memory of these numinous experiences that happen. I would even call them tangible dream experiences that happen. But whether this means that people are experiencing what they're calling abductions or friendly contact through dimensions, it just gets more complicated and just more crazy. It's like instead of getting closer to whatever we say as answers or the truth, it just raises more questions. Yes. So there are some safe things that I can recommend that if you want to start remembering your dreams, back in the day there wasn't anything. Now there's tons and tons of stuff, and I don't know how good it is or not. Anything from the Jungians, though, would be kind of difficult. So if you want to remember a dream, set an alarm clock. When I was a teenager, it was like one of those tick-tick clocks with a real bell on it, under your pillow, so that it will wake you out of a sound sleep at like 4 a.m. And it will probably interrupt your REM state when you're dreaming, which you typically wouldn't remember, but because it wakes you up in the middle of the REM state, that you will have some brief but very intense, you'll still be kind of in a bit of a dream state. And that's where you start the experiment. So once the alarm wakes you up, you can either go back to sleep, you can have a pad of paper and try to write a few words that may not be very legible to you when you wake up, but you learn how to do that. Or you can have, a recorder, a tape recorder app on your phone that you can speak into. And so the idea is just to train yourself to retain memory of what happened. It's difficult to do because then you're invoking the conscious mind, which has a very different language and perception. It doesn't always have access to the subconscious or unconscious, and the languages are very different. So a lot of it is going to be very experiential, and you won't be able to easily explain it to anyone. And I don't think that you have to explain it to anyone. The idea is like you're sort of a cosmonaut, that you're an explorer, you're a dream worker, you're exploring these different realms of dreams. Something called I'm calling it tangible dreaming for lack of a better experience. And it doesn't seem to be all that common, or maybe it is very common and people forget about it very quickly because it scares them, or the conscious mind isn't able to retain it. So keeping a dream journal in any way is a good thing. I recommend it to some of my patients who start having very, very intense, what I call psychodynamic dreams, which means that it's just not ordinary consciousness trying to resolve dilemmas while they're still asleep, but it's other aspects of the consciousness that are trying to get in touch with the consciousness, and we're trying to find a bridge. So when you're setting the alarm under the pillow, it's sort of like you've just created a bridge between the dream state and the ordinary state. And that may not sound like very much, but that's quite an intense thing to do that people don't normally do. So it's just like to experiment and try, but I consider it a pretty safe thing to do.
Kim, I was just wondering about what you recommend to people in the groups that you do about remembering their dreams or becoming more in contact with them.
pretty much the same. The basic thing for me is a dream journal to start writing things down, and from there, you know, things will start to unfold. Yeah, so I totally agree with dream journaling. Yeah.
The reason that works, or possibly a reason that is a good technique, is because when you either speak to someone in a way that feels safe, or you start externalizing the internal, like you're writing it out in black and white, your left brain becomes activated, and the left brain is the one that wants to see black and white. It wants to see evidence. It wants numbers. And so when you're writing on the page, you're activating your left brain. The right brain is what was really activated in those non-ordinary states, in those dream states. And so we really have two brains in many ways. So when you write something out like that, or you hear yourself talking, you're invoking these external senses of sight and hearing, which are very different from the internal senses that we might call clairaudience or clairvoyance. You are connecting the left and right brain by writing it out, and suddenly you have what's called a holotropic or a holistic experience that it begins to help create the neural pathways in your brain to help you retain memory. And the way that you create neuropathic pathways in your brain, which are the connections, is repetition. The brain learns through repetition. It's the way that you learn your mathematics or your multiplication tables. You repeated them over and over and over again, and finally the brain one day said, "Shut up, I get it. You don't have to do that anymore. I'll remember them for you." It's the same way. So dream journaling is like a kind of repetition, but some people may find that it will open up into something we could call automatic writing. Like suddenly it seems like the story is unfolding itself, or some people have even found a way to connect with non-embodied people or non-embodied entities in that way through writing. So the sky's the limit. There's a multi-dimensional experiential aspect to it, invoking all kinds of different ways of receiving data, in the body, out of the body, in dreams, out of dreams, utilizing time in different ways. It just seems like it's a very rich, multi-dimensional experience that you had that is kind of leaves you in awe of it. It doesn't necessarily explain anything. In the last book that I wrote on grief, on the grief process, is that our ego often causes us to doubt such experiences. Our undisciplined ego causes us to doubt such experiences or to fear such experiences. And so it raises all these questions. And what I suggest is that we already know the answer, is to remove the question mark and replace it with a period. And because you already, and say it to yourself in that way, that you already know the answer, you already have the answer. If you feel that it's a question that you want an answer to, then everyone has a different spiritual way of asking the universe for more information, for more answers. One of the main things that I point out several times is that not all mysteries were meant to be solved, and some mysteries just lead us to more clues, and the clues are just leading us to more clues, and so we're never going to solve it in some kind of way. There's just more to come.
Thank you, August, for your presentation. My question is about recurrent or repetitive dream state, usually about the same time. And as you defined tangible, I'd like to use that same definition for your response to repetition, and whether or not the lesson, shall we say, or the messages are the same.
Well, in my tangible dream experiences, there are no messages. It was experience. in the same way that like the farm that I grew up on, if you know, somebody said the cows need milking, we wouldn't sit around the table and talk about the cows. We would just go do it. There was no message inherent in that. So like my tangible dream experiences were just experiences in the same way that we go through certain developmental physical stages and certain emotional developmental stages. It seems to me that my interpretation of my tangible dreaming was it was some kind of developmental stage that was pertinent or relevant to my being in some kind of way. And I've chosen just to simply accept it. A lot of it is okay and as mystery. If you're having a dream experience that's repeating itself, you mean it's like a theme that keeps emerging, or it's always like talking to the same person, or it's like a recording that just keeps going over and over again? That's what I technically call a psychodynamic dream, where there's a psychological aspect of the mind that is trying to complete itself or resolve itself. It's almost like there's a scratch in the record that's trying to get to the end of the song. And because like you could listen to part of a song and you could get some of the message of the song, especially if there's lyrics, and then you think that that's all there is to the song, and someone says, no, didn't you the whole thing, like how it ends? And said, no. So it's like the dream is like that. It's trying to play to the end of the song to get you, it's trying to bring you a message in some kind of a way. It's usually, it's trying to resolve something that you're either a person's very anxious about. It's usually about fear, like there's some sort of a fear or there's some sort of a trauma. The trauma may not even be remembered. It may have happened before memories are forming, but the body remembers the trauma. And so when the mind is asleep, that allows the body to bring these traumatized experiences into our awareness, because it can't bring them into a physical reality in any kind of a way. So dream journaling often will help you have that aha experience. So this is the message it's trying to bring to me. Sometimes there are people who say that hypnosis could do that for you, where they sort of put you back in that relaxed state and start the conversation and ask you to report what you're seeing and what you're hearing, and then maybe they can help you finish the dream, as it were. But that's just one way of looking at it. It really depends on the content of it. I know someone that they dream for years of just finding themselves standing on this huge shore of an endless ocean, and it didn't make any sense, but they had a lot of emotion about it. This ocean inspired in them feelings of awe, fear, depth, emotions they normally didn't have during waking time, but apparently these emotions were necessary in order to nourish their whole being, and so they were having them during the dream state too. So I always ask people, or ask yourself, like, what is the emotional content of this dream? Because feelings bring us a message, and feelings always tell us the truth. Our feelings never lie to us. Our minds lie to us all the time. Our minds make up things and they twist things around and they fill in the gaps and they tell stories, but our feelings are always telling us the truth. So if you can get to what the feeling content of the dream is, some people do that through art, if they can't do it through writing, or they do it through music, or they do it through dancing, you know, or drumming, or just walking in nature. But somehow you have to find the feeling and feel it. And feelings will bring us messages. They'll bring us data.
Thank you, August.
That's a
Laurie.
lot. I don't know if that all makes sense, but
Yes, thank you very much. Very clear.
I don't know. This seems like it might be related, but I have these very odd dreams every once in a while where I'm extremely aware of my body in bed, you know, laying down and the whole thing. And at the same time, there's some other stuff going on, like maybe in some other room, there's a bunch of stuff happening, people in there doing whatever. And and I know what's going on in there as close as if I were in that room or if I were reading about it. I mean, there's, you know, lots of detail. So, and other times there's two of me, and one of me is very aware of being laying in bed, and the other one is involved in some other activities in the dream. Have you ever heard of anything like that, or had an
yeah, sure.
experience like that?
So does it disturb you?
No, not really. I just think it's strange. Like, I don't really know how to look at it. It doesn't usually, you know, things aren't really significant like that going on in there. It's not like there's messages in it or anything. It's just something that's happening. It's strange.
Right. It's not like the Pope showing up in your dream and
Right.
saying
No, it's not like
summons
that.
you.
It's just that I know I'm in bed laying down at the same time that all that stuff is going on.
So for me, it has the feel of trying to stimulate your curiosity, trying to get your attention.
Oh, yeah, maybe so.
And so there are three things that I advise across the board in terms of how do we approach these things, or what kind of posture do we adopt? And it's to remain curious and unbiased and unafraid. And if we can achieve those three things, it maintains an opening that allows more to come through, or allows us to go through sometimes too. It allows things to unroll if we can stay curious but don't be afraid. A lot of people say, well, I have a very hard time being unbiased. I have biases about some things, and I get that. So if you can just say, well, I'm just very curious about this and I'm not going to be afraid, the state of unbiasedness will arise. And unbiased just means not getting in the way. And just sort of being curious and looking at it. It's like two little kids going in a field full of flowers and stuff, and they come upon a really weird looking insect, just a dramatic looking bug. And the one little kid, they're both very curious about it, but the one little kid is not afraid and just stays there and sees what will happen. He or she is just going to allow this to go. See, like, because the bug is looking at me too, so let's just sit here and be aware of one other's presence. And the other child will be curious, but will be so afraid that they'll kind of lunge forward and either try to kill the bug or get rid of it or slap it off them or start screaming and crying. So fear is an important element to be aware of, how we respond to fear. So it sounds to me like your experience is just trying to get your attention to lead you a little bit further.
That's interesting, because in my waking life, I think that I'm very curious about a lot of things, and I don't have I don't have the kinds of experiences other people do to be drawn into them. So in other words, I want them, but I don't seem to have them very often.
So the author that some of you might find interesting, his name is Philip Imbrogno, Imbrogno. I would type it for you, but I can't do that with my iPad here. IMBROG, Philip Imbrogno. He's a very well-known paranormal researcher. He wrote some best-selling books, and at the time that my first book came out, his book came out, and that's how we found each other, because he was writing about UFOs. He was like the preliminary expert on UFOs here in the United States, and he developed what he called the new science, and he realized that the evidence was showing that a certain percentage of UFO experiences were apparently that, but that there were other ones that were actually experiences with what he was calling interdimensional beings, not necessarily flesh and blood extraterrestrials. And then a certain percentage of his statistics were showing that some of the UFO experiences actually were people in spirit from the afterlife contacting us, and we were interpreting it as UFOs in some kind of a way. So he and I had like sort of a meeting of the minds, and he loved like we just both, I was talking about interdimensional beings, and so was he as well too. So if you're interested in UFOs and things like that, you might find his work interesting.
August, that was fabulous. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. I think you've offered everybody a great deal to think about and look at their dreams from other perspectives, which is always enlightening. So thank you very much for everybody.
You're welcome.